We received a new update on the 4th edition of Age of Sigmar from Games Workshop yesterday in the form of a 2-minute and 16-second video, and that might have been a short video, but it packed a lot of information into it. So today we're going to take a look at all of that new information and why maybe we shouldn't be as worried about the 4th edition as some may have thought. Now, the video started with a story recap about the new setting for the new edition, but there wasn't really any new information there, so we're going to skip that and get right into the good stuff. First, we had some new information about the Spearhead mode that's coming with the new Spearhead boxes. So the old Vanguard box sets have been replaced with Spearhead boxes. That's what they said in the video. Well, 3 of them have been, but the rest of them haven't been, so we don't really have any information about that. They were showing the old artwork on the previous announcement with this Spearhead mode. So some theories might be that we're going to get, you know, the old boxes will just become Spearhead boxes, or maybe we're going to use the Vanguards until they have released a bunch of new Spearheads. But at this point, we are going to be using a lot of Vanguards upon launch unless we get some new news. So they also said the games are going to take under 1 hour, which is really impressive. Each box is going to have a complete and balanced army with its own rules. And I'm really excited to see those rules because I have a Lumineth Vanguard and I also have most of a Cities of Sigmar one, so I could play a couple different factions. And now I've seen people praise the Combat Patrol for 40k, which is just the equivalent of Spearhead in that game. But I've also seen people speak poorly about it because of a lack of updates and a lack of balance. So I'm kind of curious to see how that shakes out for Spearhead. But at the end of the day, even if we don't have a mode that, you know, helps the majority of experienced Age of Sigmar players, it's still a really important mode for new players. Like when I got into Age of Sigmar, it was me and my buddy Dave, and we each bought a Vanguard. And so for us to have everything that we need to play a match right there and then from buying those Vanguards, that's a pretty good deal. That's really good for the health of the game and for getting people into it. And so I'm curious to see if it's going to get played in my local Warhammer store on the Age of Sigmar night, and I guess we'll see if it is a long-lasting format or if it's a new player format. And then we learned more about the 4th edition rules, and some of the things that they said were kind of recaps, and some of it was new. So the first thing was modular approach to the rules, and that means that you only have to learn the rules that you need when you need them. And this is referring to the keywords for special unit rules like musicians and standard bearers and maybe champions and other things like that, because those modular pieces can be inserted into any book in any faction and it will just make sense and everybody will be able to understand what's going on. So I'm very curious about this, what this means for unique weapons with different profiles, not just from like a unit build choice perspective, but also for champions, because sometimes champions have plus attacks with the same weapon as the rest of their unit, and other times they have a special weapon that has more rend or other characteristics. And I think what's most likely is that we see a more homogenized unit champions to make gameplay flow more. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, because knowing my champion has unique stuff is pretty cool. But when you think that he is specifically, or she or he is specifically the champion of their unit, that's a really cool distinction to have. So this next part was new. They said the game is more interactive, allowing you to cast spells and even charge in your opponent's turn. And as a TCG player, I think that this really excites me. However, I hardly think it's going to make the game more accessible or flow better, because I actually think the opposite will happen. The aspect of playing games, like interacting with people, that aspect is really hard for new players in any game, because there's just more times for you to interact with the game. If you only can do stuff on your turn, you can learn that and kind of sit back and think on your opponent's turn, and you have very few decisions to make, because right now there's just a few commands that you can use and then your battle priorities. But if you can cast spells and charge, all of a sudden a huge new tactical advantage is gained if you know how to use those things properly, and that's going to be difficult for new players. That's not to say they shouldn't do it, because I absolutely love interacting with people on their turns in any game. I think that's a really key part of a game. That's a big draw for me. So I'm all for it. I think this may introduce a new layer of salt to the game, because people will have these plans in their head and they can get squashed potentially. So I'm very curious to see what priority will look like. As an example, you know, can you do this in a very specific part of a phase, at the end of a phase? Does your opponent get all of their options first? Can you say, hey, I'm going to counter that right when they're doing something? Like, that will be a really big part of how this lands and you know, how it's implemented. We also have changes to priority means that you'll pay a heavy cost if you want to take that tempting double turn. So I'm not familiar enough with the game to know what this could mean, but I'm very curious. Again, this is something that from my brief time engaged with Age of Sigmar that I see people really polarized about. I see a lot of people obviously hate the double turn because it can be game ending, but I also see people say that it's not that big of a deal. So I want to hear from you about this topic and what you think about it. We also heard about more impactful battlefield terrain, and I love that. Does that mean we'll see more cover? Does that mean maybe bonuses for using terrain in your tactics? Like if you charged from behind terrain, would that give you some sort of advantage? Or are they talking about faction terrain and giving you more reason to bring it into your actual battle, into your points list? Then in that case, that's also very cool to hear about. We also heard about streamlined army list building, and this is interesting. It sounds good on paper, but this is actually a statement that will set off the alarm bells in a lot of people's heads about choice being taken away. And it remains to be seen how those things will actually be streamlined and what that really means, because as a new player, I don't think list building is particularly hard. Like, I've only played one match, but it wasn't, I didn't have like an insane amount of choices to be able to do anything. It's not complicated in 3rd edition, so I don't really understand what they could streamline without making things like too simplified. So I'm a little bit more on that later, but we also have a more reactive command system similar to what we already spoke about. I'm all for interaction, and I wonder if we're going to get more command points so that we have them available to use on our opponent's turn more often, or how that will actually work. And then they said there's going to be a new underdog mechanic to make sure that there are nail-biting finishes to your games. And apparently this exists in 40K, but I don't really know much about 40K. So if you're familiar with that system, then please enlighten us in the comments. But I'm very curious how people feel about this, because for a casual game, I think it's great, right? Like if you're playing with your friend and there's a chance for them to come back and it's a really glorious battle, then like all the power to you. But if this is competitive, then, you know, this has to be implemented in a way that, again, doesn't bring too much salt to the table, because we're not cooking, we're playing Warhammer. Now, if you like Age of Sigmar content and you want more news videos, you want to hear more about my progress as a hobbyist, as a player, you know, any of that type of stuff, then consider subscribing to the channel. I mean, you made it this far into the video, so clearly you must like it a little bit. But that wasn't all the video had to share, because we also got more information about battletomes, list building, and play options. So the battletomes from 3rd edition are going to be invalid. That was already known, but each faction's going to get that downloadable faction pack, and they showed a little image of what the cover of that might look like for Stormcast. It's free on launch day. It's going to contain everything that you need to play, including, here's the really key part, war scrolls, battle traits, battle formations, heroic traits, artifacts of power, prayers, and spells. So there, some of the doomsaying, or I don't want to say doomsaying, people have legitimate fears, and they have, you know, studies, case studies of what's happened in a Games Workshop game. So, you know what, well, let's not call it that, but either way, here's some things that people said. What if they take out spells? What if they take out, you know, heroic traits or formations or whatever these things are? They're going to be in the game. Now, that's really good. A lot of things that we're worried about, we don't have to worry about anymore. However, this is where you might say the streamlined list building will come into play. Does that mean we're going to see the same number of choices available in the 4th editions for all of the above? Will it be reduced amounts of all of it? Or maybe shared traits between armies and fewer army-specific ones? Or maybe more combined spell lores with like very specific war scroll spells, so it's like all streamlined of where things are? This is where I think Games Workshop needs to give us more information ASAP to allay some of those fears. So we also found out that point values are going to be available at launch, but not in those faction packs. They're going to be online, and this makes sense because that will just help, you know, new players that are coming in for a new edition. They're not going to have something on paper that says how much points their thing is worth, and then it's going to change. You know, it just makes it easy for the, you know, the upkeep of these documents. There's also going to be battle plans and battle tactics from the new General's Handbook in the launch box. And so this launch box is looking better and better as we get more information about it. But unfortunately, I'm not into either faction. And so I think I'm not going to get this product, even though it seems to have a lot of value. Multiple armies, Spearhead mode, the core book, and then now your matched play stuff. It really has something for everybody, from new players to experienced players alike, which is really cool to see. They also mentioned that Path of Glory has been revamped to focus on the progression of your heroes and units as your army gains power. And I'm super interested in this. This kind of narrative play is one of the things that has most piqued my interest about Warhammer, and I kind of told myself that I am going to practice playing some just regular games before I even worry about Path to Glory. So I've read the options in both my battletomes and in some White Dwarf magazines, but I don't know a lot else about it. And my understanding right now is that it's about establishing your force overall, and maybe either establishing cities or defending the territories that you already own. But the new focus is going to be on heroes specifically. So what I'm curious about is this going to be like a story mode, like a campaign mode, where there's quests that your heroes go on. And I know that there's already quests that you go on, but like I'm specifically talking about like your hero is the focus of it. And you kind of take it from like an MMO, perspective of like, you are this person in this, with this army and leading them into battle. And that could be really, really cool, if they made that kind of adjustment to it. But I don't really know much about it, so I can't critique it that much. Overall, I think this was a really important video for Games Workshop to release. I think that it will have done some good work in towards quelling some of the fears that people might have had about the new edition. And I'm very curious about when we're going to get more information, maybe in April's White Dwarf magazine. And if we do get some more information about 4th edition in the magazine, I will be sharing that here on this channel with you all. In general, I'd like to try to cover the release of 4th edition as much as possible. And I think not just covering the rules themselves and some of the news updates and the new factions, or not new factions, new units, but I also want to maybe take a look at those faction packs. Maybe I can make some videos that compare and contrast the old ones to the new ones, and what factions are losing, what are they gaining, what is the vibe of this index edition, if it were. So let me know if you'd be interested in that, and I'd be happy to look into doing that. Otherwise, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. I'll see you all again in another video.